get, and very welcome to this webinar on, as you can see in front of you, chasing transparency in large portfolios. Now, please use your button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and we'll get them collated, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So, and there are, of course, no stupid questions, and feel free to ask anything you like, and we'll get through to those at the end. So that will be good. So what are we going to do this afternoon? I'm going to take you through a case study from a large and a complex, very large and complex portfolio from a financial services client that I've worked with over the last couple of years. And it's all about transparency and creating visibility in an enterprise. And I'm sure you know out there that this is an extremely challenging, or can be extremely challenging thing to achieve. So I want to talk through the solutions that we came up with and what the challenges were and what general issues, general lessons there might be for and useful for applying elsewhere on other portfolios in other organizations, because that's of course how we learn, isn't it? We take things from one place to another. But first, I would like to just thank Centrify for putting this on this afternoon and to allow me to speak to you. I like nothing more than speaking to an audience, so thank you, Centrify. I'm not allowed to mention they're right in the room with me, apparently. A little bit about me. I've been around the block a bit. I've been in software delivery for too many years. Got a few grey hairs on my beard. I've been working as a software developer. That's how I started out, in assembler and C, going back all those years, old outdated stuff nowadays, and moved into solutions architecture, and then test automation and CI/CD coaching, and then agile coaching, and then delivery coaching, and all mention of all kinds of roles and things in between. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool contractor or independent consultant, so I've been working like this for a couple of decades now. And I also write in my spare time, so you'll see a selection of my writings. On the right-hand side of your screen, you've got a guide to being a freelancer in the IT industry, which I had published quite a long time ago now, and then 3 novels. So people ask me how I get the time, but really writing is applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. So, so let's get into it. First off, I thought, like all good coaches, we have to start with the why. Why do we want portfolio transparency? And I think I've got a number of bullet points there, so but I'm also going to talk over them, and they're quite wordy, some of these slides, so don't worry if you don't get through all the words. I think what I say is going to be far more important than my words. So who knows? But what we want from portfolio transparency is an opportunity to take management decisions. Can we rely on what we're seeing to make the right call at the right time? And that's what it's about. So we get early notice of risks, or we can see risks more clearly, and then we can see when they turn into issues. We understand our capacity to deliver because we know what we've managed to deliver in the past, and we're clear that that actually matches some sort of reality. We understand how our work is affected by competing projects. You'll know that many projects often run side by side using the same delivery capacity, and they conflict, but you can't actually see that conflict in the tooling or in the reporting. I want to understand whether my project managers, my scrum masters, my product owners, my program delivery managers, my release train managers, release train engineers, I want to understand whether their plans are realistic or they're unrealistic. And what are the inherent risks if they're not planning realistically? I want to understand where my accountability for delivery lies. Who is actually in charge of delivering that piece of work and making sure that it's going to come through the pipeline and out the other end in the right manner? And when I have my progress meetings with my project managers and my program managers, or whatever way of working you've chosen, I want to know whether what they say actually matches what's happening on the ground. Ask, then verify is one of my favorites. And then ultimately, if you get your transparency right, or even partly right, you begin a virtuous circle of triggering a relentless pressure to improve your forecasting and the ways you're reporting. So that's where we're after getting into. We're after getting into that position in our programs, in our portfolios, where there is constant pressure to improve our forecasting and improve our forecast to our actuals. Look ahead. So, where have I gone there? Sorry. So just checking, got two slideshows going on at once here. So I'm just, what might we get if we target visibility? That's why we target visibility. But what might you get if you do go after visibility in a strong way? And these are some of the things that I found it leads to. So these are some of the outcomes that you get. So you get a standard work breakdown across all your delivery areas, because you need to be able to compare apples with apples and pears with pears, or at least understand what the difference is between your apples and your pears is quite clearly, so you know which to choose and which to intervene in. Now, you get a common language for your work breakdown and your statuses and your workflows. You might get a full roadmap of the large pieces of work in one place. And I mean a full roadmap from a portfolio perspective, not just a release train or not just a program. You can expect good quarterly plans, or whatever your delivery cadence is, views of your progress against your actual delivery, better forecasting, and that is proven empirically in the past to have delivered what you expected, and a continuously improving data hygiene, because it's all very well collecting the data, but you've got to make sure that it's actually correct and matches what you're expecting. And you get to know where your work is and who is doing your work. And this can be very challenging in large, complex and dependency-ridden programs. And then a standard of consistent reporting metrics for governance forums. So there's, you probably all worked in places where you have a new governance forum set up for each program, or even each project of work, and it can be extremely difficult to then pull together what that means. So after the why and the what you might expect, I'm going to introduce my financial services client. Now, this was a huge and ongoing program of work, and some 67 or more individual projects, 8 value streams in the scaled agile framework kind of idea of value streams. And they all represented their work in different ways, with different tooling, different ways of working. Some were waterfall, some were agile, some were scaled agile, some were Scrum, some were Kanban. They'd all set up their tools independently and separately. Some had project managers, some had delivery managers, different titles, different naming. We had a tangle of outcomes from different areas across technology, platforms, across your infrastructure, business change, business process change, vendors included as well, and they all had countless dependencies and different ways of working. And in order to get a view of that, when I first arrived in the program, we had a tangle, an industry of analysts toiling night and day to bring all that information together into the PMO to try and understand 2 very basic questions, which were, are we going to make it by the deadline? Or what are we going to make by the deadline? And where is the work being built, and who is responsible? And there's a metaphor there. The picture is a bit of a metaphor for the room that I found myself in, the challenging environment. And some really good work goes on, and you'll all know that really good work goes on in places, but it was hidden behind this very well-meaning inconsistency. So new project managers, which some 60 project managers, And that's before you even got into the technology delivery area, where there were more project managers and more scrum masters and more release train managers. And each one had brought along with them their own way of working in terms of putting what their requirements breakdown was and their work breakdown was, and how they traced it and tracked it and reported on it. So we had at least 3 different styles of Jira breakdown model in 3 different implementations of Jira. We had project management and portfolio management tooling. We had MSP, Microsoft Project, PowerPoint, Jira, another Jira model, Excel. People were using Excel. People were using Raw Confluence. There was Word, there was tables. We had it all, and all needed to be pulled together into some sort of reporting. But the only thing we could really rely on at the end of that was the commentary from the project and program managers and finger in the air forecast for when things would be ready. But we did have a motivation to improve things. We had external stakeholders and reviewers that expected to see consolidated plans, consolidated roadmaps, all brought together across the entire portfolio. And they wanted that now, as external stakeholders and reviewers always do. And there were a few things that they were asking for. Do we really understand what the outcomes are for each of the projects? These are simple, basic things. A schedule of when those outcomes would be delivered and what the milestones were. What were the risks and issues, the dependencies between the programs and between the portfolio projects, and resource maps showing that we could actually deliver what we said when we thought we were going to deliver it. So we needed to reconcile plans with capacity, and then a current state of play. So where were the projects at the point in time we were at? And that was a heavy motivation for the program to get a more consolidated view of its work breakdown and statuses. And so we dared to dream, and here's a schematic for what we dreamt of more than 2 years ago now, to bring shape to the ways of working for the portfolio. Now, one of the things I want to stress in all of this is that while we're going to be talking a lot about reporting and reports, actually the goal was to have the reports coming automatically out from the way of working. So each project, each area, each delivery team worked in such a similar way and recorded their work in such a similar way that we could translate between them and then automatically pull out views of that data. And now we were lucky in that we had, although I was talking about lots of different ways of recording the information, actually the portfolio had consolidated on Jira as a base tooling. So we had a platform to start with, which was very handy. I don't know where we'd be now if we didn't have that in the first instance. So we had Jira, and we decided that would become the single place and the single source of truth for all of our work breakdown data. And from Jira, we will be able to pull different views of the data depending on who was asking. So we could have a dependency view or a governance view or a view of the progress or view of the capacity, and all of those things we would be able to pull out from the data in a single central place. But we had to start somewhere, and a dream is just a dream until it's put into reality. And we had to agree, while we had the Jira model there, we didn't have a common breakdown model for everything that we wanted to achieve. So what you see there is a standard model to be applied to all of the delivery areas in the program. Now, this wasn't easy necessarily to do, because regardless of the delivery channel, they'd all invented their own ways of breaking the work down. There was some commonalities before it, but we had 3 different versions of Scale Agile with their different work breakdowns. And the PMs were pretty much at the beginning were free to manage it as they saw fit. But we put a requirement on them that they would put their work into this format. It still gave them plenty of flexibility because of context. And like I said earlier, some programs are running agile and some were running waterfall. But we enabled a model over the top of the entire program in program features. And features is a scaled agile kind of idea. And to break the work down into our building blocks. Now, each feature was about 2 to 3 months worth of work for a delivery team of about 10 people. So that was the rough guideline we had for all of our delivery areas. And the idea was that our reporting could become automatic, seamless, and curated centrally. Yes, part of that dream again. And to get to that point with the standard model, we needed a number of guidelines so that reports were comparable and consistent. We made heavy use of Confluence to put our requirements in place, i.e. The guidelines for all of our minimum sets of features and our breakdown. And we published a sizing model that told us that gave all of our teams an idea about when they were or they weren't within the guidelines. So now we had a model for how we expected all of our teams to work and some guidelines for them to follow. But that wasn't quite enough. You can see there on the right here, if I look at that, there's a minimum feature set here as well. So we used Confluence as our communications device. And we also had to agree on accountability principles. Because of the scale and the multiple layering, we had multiple leads. We had product owners, product managers, project managers, BAs, all were accountable for some things, but we needed a way of saying, hey, if your data isn't in the right format, then we need to know who to go to. So we set up a set of principles to say, this is your expectation. You may not need to do this yourself, but you are accountable for it, and you can delegate that accountability to lower down the hierarchy if you so wish. Sorry, just take a glass of water now. Now, once those rules were put in place, it took about 4 months to see the effects on the program. What you're looking at here is a Dataplane report, Arsenali, and I think that's how you pronounce it, and maybe someone could correct me. I call it the Arsenal, but Arsenali Dataplane report. And it's a plugin for Jira, and we found it extremely useful, and there'll be a bit more about that shortly. But this Dataplane report is essentially a burn-up of work. It shows how much work has been defined in the Jira implementation we were using in the Jira database, and it shows the growth over the 3 to 4 months in which it took to consolidate. You can see right at the beginning there in June, before the agreements about ownership and before we agreed what the model would be, we had very few feature-sized pieces of work or epic-sized pieces of work in the database. And then 4 months later, as the value streams came online, they brought into the process, they got their BAs and their product owners and their development teams, the delivery teams brought into the process, we can see the growth in the work defined in the tooling. And this is how we knew we were roughly at least having some success in getting the visibility into the program portfolio. All this work had been previously defined, by the way. It wasn't necessarily new work. A lot of these programs were running waterfall requirements documentations in SharePoint. They needed to be translated into the standard model of requirements breakdown that we were after in Jira. So you can see how by September we had an awful lot of the value streams that started putting their work in here. If you look at the scale on the left, that's about 750 projects of about the 2 to 3 month size. So we were beginning to build up quite a good view of what the work entailed. But it's probably worth mentioning this about reporting tools. Thank you. One thing we realised, and I realised really quickly, until I'd done this work with this financial services client, I was under a bit of a naive belief that that you could run the world on a burn-up chart, and I think I changed that idea. There really is not one tool to rule them all, and that's not just because I don't think that tool exists, although some are getting close these days. I think it's also because of constraints that you face in organisations, and people running with a historical in a historical way with the culture behind them, and it can be very challenging to get those ideas moved or adopted or evolving. So you have to make compromises wherever you are. And we had Jira, and that was a fantastic start. And it has many, many strengths. I like to say that its greatest strength is that it's infinitely configurable. But I also think that's probably its greatest weakness as well, because you can get an awful lot of different models set up in Jira very, very rapidly on a large portfolio. And it's something you need to keep control of, or I feel that we need to. Portfolio was closed to us. Jira Portfolio was closed to us for historical and cultural reasons, and we couldn't use it. And also the reporting that comes out of Jira tends to be team orientated, and our stakeholders struggled to understand Jira reports as they were presented. And that's not for want of trying and explaining and coaching. Actually, sometimes you can't get simple data needs to be presented in a simple way, and complex data needs to be presented in a simple way. But Jira is unrivaled as a work breakdown and status repository, in my opinion. There are other work breakdown tools out there as well. Jira seems to have been adopted quite widely, particularly in the Wellington area. Now, Dataplane is a plugin for Jira. It's a graphical reporting tool. And it needs strong query skills and quite good technical skills to run well. But it has a limited report selection. So it's great, it's quick and easy, and we made heavy use of it, as I'll explain later, for our hygiene reports, but it couldn't do everything we wanted. We had a tool called Structure, which is ALM Works Structure, which also requires quite a lot of learning and analysis. And we got a lot of our project managers using the tool for their own management purposes. And it can provide an extremely clear view of the work breakdown, particularly when that work breakdown is non-standard, and you can configure it to show what you want to show. But we found again that its use needed to be sanitized for the leadership. It wasn't really a report tool that could go straight to our leadership. Now, Confluence was another tool we made heavy use of. A superb spine for our documentation, and a self-service hub, i.e. a place to put links so people could then go to the various reports. But I'm sure you all know that Confluence can quickly mushroom without strong maintenance. So it's something to be really careful of, and you need to spend quite a lot of time curating Confluence. We used Excel, which is so very general. You can do almost anything you want in it, but we found difficulty publishing it in an enterprise context. And sometimes the reports we were making required very heavy technical skills, for which we only had one person. Very good for some proof of concept and ad hoc work, as was Power BI, we found. We found Power BI to be particularly useful for bringing together quite rapid proof of concepts for our reports, which were then later operationalized in the client's own services, in its own reporting BI tool. but we did find it invaluable. So those are the things that we put together. So I'm going to take you through how that all pulled together. What you see in front of you is the very original proof of concept plan that that asked the questions that was needed from our stakeholders. You can see it looks a little bit clunky. I'm not a designer, not a graphic designer, and sometimes you don't need that. You do sometimes, but not always. And this tool was put together. This view was put together from Jira data. It shows the work breakdown, i.e., if we've got an epic, what is that made from? What work goes into that? What's the list of work? A release roadmap showing our schedule of when our epics or when our features were going to be delivered. Because these were tied in or assigned to various delivery teams, we could get a people and capacity view of those roadmaps. And risks were taken from another tool we were using, which was a project management tool. So we extracted the risk data from that project management tool to present it. Now, what you're seeing is a manual mock-up of that. The actual live one was in Confluence and took the data automatically from those sources to present a view, quite similar to this. And on the left-hand side there, you'll see the current state solution. So in this particular case, it had, I don't know, I think it's 3 features and what state were they in the status of to do, doing, done sort of thing. So that was our original initial plan for our stakeholders. And we, luckily enough, that was enough to move on to the next level because we now had the foundations laid in the portfolio. So I talked earlier about what we were trying to build, which was a standard model of the requirements in Jira, and then automate the extraction of that data into the views for the various stakeholders and for the various people. So now we had our data in place, we were able to create that initial view, which if you think about it, was actually more than an initial view because it was status, it was a capacity view, and it was a timeline view as well. So within that 4 short months, we had managed to get quite a good program view. But here's some more stuff that we could get as well. So here's the Dataplane burnup. One of my great successes, which I'm very proud of, actually, I've over the years, and I think I told you I thought you could solve the world with a burn-up chart. Over the years, I've tried to get a burn-up chart into many stakeholders and into steering committees, and there's always resistance. For some reason, there is resistance. A, it's graphical, B, it's an empirical idea. And so often, I'm sure you realise, these don't necessarily forecast what the milestones that have been published in stone, literally sometimes, they don't necessarily match up to what's already been planned. And so it makes it, burn-up can be an incredibly political chart. But we were lucky enough to have a program director that bought in, saw the potential and bought in to the way of working, i.e. the idea of we breaking the work down in a standard model and then extracting the data into its various views. Now, when he saw this, this became one of our key management tools because it answered the question, are we going to make it? Or are we at risk of not making it more, I suppose, more particularly? And Dataplane is a good tool for this. It can show you and it can annotate the graphs and put these trend lines on, as you can see there. So it's quite a useful tool. It is, again, it's quite a basic tool in the sense of what it actually displays. There's very few bells and whistles there, but you get the information you need to. Now, one of the things that we discovered with our graphical representations, and Dataplane gives you a lot of good graphical representations, and we did a lot in Excel too, was that our executives didn't much like graphs. And I don't quite know where that comes from. I find a graph so much more easy to understand. but this was the view that we settled on after the burn-up went into the steering packs. We were then able to evolve what we were showing into an indicator view, and that's what you're looking at here. So this indicator view again comes from the same data. This one uses Power BI to extract the data and to put it into these lovely indicator boxes. And it gives you a number of indications about where the project is. So I'm going to just take to the top left-hand box there, the sorts of things we're talking about. These are sheer numbers of program features that have been planned in one quarter and how many have actually been delivered. So very, very straightforward numbers. And you can argue that, is that real? And we'll get onto that in a minute. But those are the sorts of things we could pull out from our standard database. And that indicator view led to wanting a better control over each quarter. And you'll see here in front of you an extract from Jira that we did originally in Power BI that took the data and split it down, sliced and diced, if you like, by work stream or value stream, as they were called, and looked at the plan for the quarter. So if I don't know if you can see my mouse, I hope you can. That plan to finish column shows how many program features were planned to finish in the quarter. And then there is a status for each of those. So those 53 plan to finish for the first value stream, and they've got 25 in progress, and 14 have been completed, and then 10 have yet to start. So that's how to read this chart. It's nice and quite graphical, and it gave us a really good idea of what the plan versus the actuals were. So at the end of every quarter, we could see, hey, value stream, you plan to do 100 of these features, and you did 50. Let's look at what's going on, and let's see if we can get your forecasting a bit better next time. Let's see what we can do to improve. So a lot of the data gave us an excuse or an opportunity for coaching, an opportunity for looking at areas, and an opportunity for management intervention as well. And this simply would not have been possible without a chart like this. Now, I think maybe it's because I've looked at this graph, this chart for too long. Well, I find this incredibly simple and quite easy to interpret. But that belies the complexity that there is underneath. Remember, we're dealing with lots and lots of disparate programs and projects. And there's a whole multitude of complexities underneath that. So, for example, if I just take you to look at the number abandoned here, abandoned means, hey, we're not going to do that work. Actually, it was probably raised in error, or we've discovered something new and we don't need that work anymore. Now, what happens, for example, if you didn't plan that piece of work at the beginning of the quarter, so it's not in the plan to finish, but you raise it, it becomes unplanned work because it wasn't part of the plan for the quarter, and then you abandon it. Well, does it appear here or does it get lost? And so we had to define these columns extremely carefully and coach and train people to understand what these numbers actually meant. And it's not as simple as just providing a report. There's coaching and training and understanding that must go with it too. And one of the issues we had, political things as well. So you'll see the unplanned column, and I just mentioned it. The unplanned column is here. Now, what that meant was, hey, you're working on things that you didn't plan to finish. Now, this was our pressure on batch sizing, if you like, on our work in progress. Please try to limit the number of things you start that you don't plan to finish in the quarter. The idea behind this is to slowly coach smaller batch sizes and to focus on the work right in front of you instead of trying to start too many. What's that famous coaching saying? Stop starting, start stopping. No, stop starting, start. I forget now. Start finishing. That's it. Stop starting, start finishing. Good grief. It's quite a high pressure situation, this, I'm telling you. So that's where we were. Now we had these look great, but we still had gaps in our visibility. And every time we produced a new report or we wanted to show something different, we found more gaps and we had to keep filling them. And Jira is a great tool for a team, but sometimes getting a program view can be a challenge, and particularly when each area that you're talking about, all of the delivery areas, and there was some 50 individual delivery teams and about a dozen delivery areas, including business delivery areas as well. And they were, while they were migrating to the standard model, they still had their own ways of working and their own breakdown models, and trying to get a view of that in a transparent way is extremely challenging in Jira. So we sourced a tool called Structure from ALM Works, and we found this gave us a very highly configurable way of interrogating our Jira data. And you can see an example there in front of you. It's a hierarchical view of your Jira data. So the way to think about this is to look at this and say, oh, look, there's an epic, fuel efficiency epic. I'm not sure if these are the right terms because this was taken from the ALM Works website. So thank you, ALM. So this is an epic, and it's broken down into a number of pieces of work that need to be done to complete that epic. And then there's a progress chart and so on and so forth. Now, we found that because we had lots of different ways of representing the work, not all epics and stories, some teams had turned the naming convention on its head. Some were using subtasks. Some were using their own Jira special issue types that they had created for them. So we had to find a way of creating this hierarchy regardless of what you had decided in your individual area. So here's some examples of the things we managed to get from this. So the one here at the top, this is a dependency Gantt view. So this shows how a particular theme, in this case, we were using Jira themes, which is a custom type in Jira, and how that's broken down into multiple features, and there are dependencies on each feature underneath to show what needs to be done first and what needs to be done last. So there's a Gantt view there. And then here is another similar one to the one I've shown you, another configuration of structure to show the breakdown of features into their dependencies and where those dependencies are and what status they are in. So these are great analytical tools for program managers and product owners, product managers, and release train engineers and so on and so forth to show where their work is. One of the things we had stipulated in our minimum standards was that each item was given a business contact and a technical contact, so we knew exactly who to go to if we saw risks or issues in the hierarchy. So those are the sorts of reports we were using and how we were pulling it all together and how we were getting that view. But one of the things that kept me up at night sometimes was, is it all fiction? Have the BAs, because they've been asked to put this in Jira, have they just invented a list of stuff? And have they just, because we're asking them to finish things at the end of the quarter, are they closing them down and re-raising new ones? Does it actually represent the work and represent the progress? And I worried about this a lot, but we found a way of at least bringing to the surface some of those issues, because we continually found work that wasn't represented in the tooling, and we continually learned new things about how people work in the real world, because of course this was if you like, a program office view of the work, which is can be a little bit separated from the actual work going on the ground. But one of the things we found extremely effective was to run regular hygiene reports to find anomalies in the structures, in the data, in the way the data was set up. Now, if you think about this, we're just dealing, if you go back to the old days of a requirements document, you'd have a document with a title, and then you'd have chapters, and then each chapter will be split into paragraphs or sections and then paragraphs. And we're sort of looking at a similar sort of hierarchy when you look at programs. You have them split from a portfolio into programs, into projects potentially, and then the epics under each project, and then the stories, and so on and so forth. So we're just dealing with a hierarchy. But we found so many different ways and anomalies in that hierarchy. So you'd find tasks that were attached to features and tasks that weren't the right size and so on and so forth. So we ran a series of reports in, and we mostly use Dataplane for this, and that's the examples you've got in front of you, to find those anomalies. And what you're looking at in the graphs, for example, was there's 32 features here with incorrect traceability linkages. Now, we used Confluence to hold these reports, and the Confluence page set out exactly what the problem was and exactly how our project manager or our BA or who was accountable for these particular pieces of work, how they fixed the problem. So in this case, the incorrect traceability linkages, it was probably a feature that didn't have a traceable breakdown. So it didn't have stories in delivery teams somewhere. So this just gave us a list of those issues that we found. And then we sent off a nice polite email saying, hey, you're on the naughty list and Santa's not coming this year. We're going to talk a little bit more about the political implications of some of these things in a minute. And then on the right-hand side as well, you see a late features naughty list, which looks at the schedule dates, it looks when it was planned, and it says, hey, we found these features, they were supposed to be done 2 weeks ago, they haven't been updated, there's no comment, what's going on? Again, opportunities for coaching, for mentoring, for training, and for potential intervention as well. Now, a word about the mentoring and the coaching. We regularly ran what we called uplift sessions, which are essentially coaching sessions. A huge program like that has continuous churning of individuals and people. It's not always possible to get the people that come with Jira knowledge already baked in. And sometimes they come with ideas how they've worked before and they'd love to try them out. And of course, we're all for innovation, but when you're trying to get consistency, that's not necessarily always the best. And so we ran training sessions and uplift sessions regularly for new starters. We had it embedded into the induction program. And we ran refreshers and skills uplifts as well. And we were guided often by what I called the naughty lists to say, hey, we think we've got an issue in this area. We don't think we've done our training very well because we're getting this issue is showing up all the time. So that's how we used those hygiene reports, and they worked really well, I have to say. So as we went through the program, we improved hygiene dramatically, and it was one of the targets for us. So that we could be much more confident when we gave the burn up to our stakeholders, we could be confident that we had all of the features had been declared. We knew what the schedule was and the roadmaps were, and we also knew that they'd been broken down by delivery teams in the right areas. And that was a huge win for us, getting that traceability of requirements through by driving these hygiene reports, because we could have confidence at that stakeholder level that what we were saying wasn't nonsense. Because when you are going to a program executive with a report that says, hey, you're going to have to extend your deadline by another X months, add your own number in here, then you're not going to be taken seriously unless you can provide some pretty good backup. Hey, so we're getting towards the end now of what I have to say to you, but it's a good story, I think, and I'm really pleased that I've been invited along to share this with you. To some extent, it is a story, and there's a lot of, you've got to take a lot of realism and a pinch of salt with things, but there are things we didn't achieve, and we weren't after them either necessarily. So agile. Nominally, this was an agile organization. It already had 3 implementations of Scaled Agile going on that I knew of. But really, this program was not trying to be agile. We took some of the best aspects of agile techniques and we used them to aid transparency, inspection, and some adaptation. And we took things that were necessary to start improving, like ceremonies, where we looked at what we had achieved in a quarter and we took some lessons and we applied WIP limits where possible to the next set of plans. And we were keen on trying to keep pressure on that batch size, as I mentioned earlier, because we knew that if we could get smaller batch sizes, we could get more focus in the program. And we had a commitment to a centralized work breakdown. But none of these in and of themselves make agile. And you can apply these techniques to quite happily to a waterfall or an infrastructure program. Did we deliver, after all me talking about our plans versus actuals, did we actually ever deliver to that plan? And I won't say quite no. It got a lot better over the period I was there. But the thing I take away from this is that we showed the discrepancy between our plans and the actual delivery. And it was a constant source of conversation, and it was a constant area that we knew we had to improve, and improvements did start coming in towards the end of my tenure there. So, so not so much that we delivered to plan, but it did provide us an opportunity for improvement. And getting data out of Jira and creating nice flashy reports with nice colors does not cover everything. And we still had to rely on the commentary of our program and project managers to interpret the data and to explain the data. Data is an alternative to collaboration. Sorry, beg your pardon, is not an alternative to collaboration. It's an aid to collaboration. It helps you keep the noise in your management decisions to a limit, but it'll still be there, and commentary is still really important. So just to list out the challenges, and I've alluded to many of these already, but here are the ones we found, and I'll take on to my next engagements. Taking it seriously. I've been in change in the sense of being an agile coach for a while, and it can be extremely difficult to get people to take change seriously. And the key ingredient in this particular instance was a senior leadership buy-in from the program director who saw what could be achieved and was eager to pursue those ideas. And we were plagued by the idea that reporting was a one-off thing. In other words, oh my goodness, it's the end of the quarter, let's put some stuff into Jira, let's update some statuses. And we were plagued by that over and over. And what we found from our naughty lists was that there were recidivist offenders. And so that gave us opportunity to intervene there. But that is a real challenge, because people don't equate the reports with a sort of ongoing, continuous assessment of the work, which is how I'd like to see it done. We found that regardless of how many reports we produced, we were asked for more and different ways of slicing the data up. Now, we did consolidate on that lovely colourful chart, the quarters versus actuals that I showed you earlier. But we didn't get away ever from the continuous ask from different stakeholders, oh, can you just give me it in this format? Can you break it down by delivery team, by program person, by the type of work? And there seems to be no end to the number of ways you can break work down in that respect. Now, we tried to consolidate as much as we could, but that just went on and on. Our issue with who owns the work was never, it was helped, but it was never solved completely. When you have one project that ends up getting split into 50 delivery teams and have cross dependencies, who and you want to find out who's actually owning that work. And you have actually people arguing about who owns it, and that makes it very challenging. We found that despite what people say and how things work, that not always is the knowledge really there to understand what is trying to be achieved. So I have an old adage, and I think Peter Cotter said it best. He said that when you want to change something, you underestimate the amount of communication you need by tenfold. Oh, no, it's 100-fold. No, actually, it's 10,000 times. And I think that's something I fell into the trap of again, is we could have done more communication and better communication. Now, we had political challenges with calling out people's work. You saw the name naughty list there, and you may have even made a sharp intake of breath. And yes, some people are very offended by the idea that they've made the naughty list, and there was pressure to change that. The only thing I said was, hey, it's working. We managed to reduce our hygiene and get our hygiene down, and people did get used to it. It's one of those things where you have to be careful, but the idea is that we're just creating transparency and showing it how it is with a little bit of a sense of humour. So there can be political challenges. 8 minutes left on time, so we'll get to the end very quickly now. We didn't always hire the right people with the right skill sets. Actually getting that hiring, getting that done correctly was really hard for us because there's so many people involved in the hiring, which meant we had to communicate more and do more of training and more mentoring. No one tool did it all, as I've already explained. And then within one organisation, it is quite surprising how many different ways of working there can be and how many different understandings there can be. And you could go into a conversation talking about an epic, and it will be very different to the next conversation where you're talking about an epic. So we had lots of problems like that. And then we struggled with ambition always. The plans were always more ambitious than could be delivered, and that's the planning fallacy. So my takeaways from all of this are that we have an imperative target. You have an imperative to target visibility and identify the key stakeholder who's prepared to let it happen. If you don't have that drive from the top, this is going to be very challenging. Keep on publishing and communicating the standard guidelines. And appoint the individuals accountable for that work and how that delivery plans are set out. Find and communicate inconsistencies in how the work is represented. That's our hygiene lists. Always develop and publish plans versus actual reports aligned to your delivery cadence. And so many companies are falling into the safe area now and are delivering on a quarterly cadence. And I personally think that's all for the good. But it is important when you have those plan versus actual ideas, and you're looking at what you planned and how you actually delivered to it, that you have you incorporate that into all your program ceremonies. If you didn't make it, if you didn't make the data, or if you were overachieved, let's get that called out and in the status meetings so we can actually make interventions. Communicate 10,000 times more than you thought was necessary, as I've said. Stick at it. We kept going. Sometimes I wanted to leave, honestly, and I kept going, and the team kept going, and we took feedback, and we continuously evolved those reports to be consumable and useful. And sometimes you take the same information and it needs to be done in different ways, and that's okay. The goal is to get the message across. And we worked really hard on making those interpretations accessible to our customers. But most of all, I think, and the biggest takeaway is that if you have a great supporting team, you can achieve quite good things. And we had a couple of really good digital business intelligence analysts and some good agile coaches on the team, and a great operations team that supported and bought into this way of operating. And that's the biggest takeaway. And I'm very grateful to those people as well. And if you're listening, thank you very, very much. And I think that's about it. I think we've got into Q&A now.
Yeah, we've had Anisha here from Centrify facilitating this session. Really enjoyed hearing about that experience.
Thank you.
Will, and hearing how you went from, tangled to, more orderly and visibility. It's really, really enjoyed it. Thanks. We have a couple of questions, and please, for anyone that would like to ask a question, if you haven't already, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and feel free to add anything there, and it'll pop up in front of us. But I've got a few already through. We've got 5 or 6 on the list, so I'll just I'll read these out to you, Will, and you can see how you go on the fly.
Okay.
So first one from New Zealand. How did you convince people to change?
Firstly, the understanding of why we were trying to achieve things was very important, and that's the first starting point. And then because we had really good program leadership that had bought into the ways of working, there was always, and I hate to say it, but there was always a threat of escalation for things when things weren't moving the way we wanted them to move. But probably the biggest factor in this is the keeping at it. If you just keep on asking, where is the data? Where is the information? It needs to be in this format. If you just keep on going and you keep raising the data and using the data in your management meetings and your progress reporting and your stand-ups, you keep using that data, people very quickly get the idea that this is important data and they need to use it. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg. You start using the data before it's fully formed, and then as you use it, it becomes better and better and better and more accurate and more useful. I hope that answers the question, New Zealand.
Moving right along, the next one from Australia. What was the ongoing resource requirement to maintain the system that you had built? I would imagine that once it's in place, if left to its own devices, would have a half-life, question mark. Yeah. So you've probably had a look at that idea that it's automatic and central, and you've gone, yeah, I know the question to ask, Will. So you're dead right. There is a half-life. The reports were operationalized into 2 places. One into the PMO for the portfolio, and it had it PMO. It's called an operation team. And they took care of the naughty lists, the hygiene reports, and making sure that work was snapshotted for those plans versus actuals. But the BI report I showed you was operationalized into a team of BI experts in Australia, actually. And they took on the maintenance of that with the product owner sitting in the operations team in New Zealand. So there is still, as I know there is still need to keep the reports going, but I'm quite confident that because the pressure is now what's the right word to say? Because we've set the pattern, I'm quite confident that that will continue. It is a matter of making sure that, as I said in the answer to the last question, that you keep using that data and then it keeps getting updated and doesn't fall behind. That's one of my biggest fears, though, having left, that the data just begins to deteriorate, becomes less useful, and then people fall away from using it. So yes, but there is quite a heavy number of people. We had about 6 people on the team at one point, and it went down to 3 of us with support. So, and then the team in Australia too. That was 2 people. Thanks, Will. We're just on the hour. Time for one more if we can. This is a question from somebody in New Zealand. What did management have greater confidence from what was put in place?
They had greater confidence in the data, and actually what I think we showed for this particular client was the optimism that had come through from the original planning of the program, and we began to show that and showed it again quarter on quarter, month on month, that the plans were overly optimistic based on the capacity, and that message slowly came across, and intervention began. Whether, and I don't know the answer to whether that intervention would have happened anyway, because I haven't got split testing here, but I like to think that we got that intervention earlier, and we brought capacity on board earlier because of the data that we were showing. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple more, but we're over time now, so
I'm happy if anyone wants to
throw one more at you.
Throw a curveball.
Would you recommend standardising in the future to the level that you did?
Well, actually, yes. On a scaled agile, in a scaled agile environment, or in a scaled environment where you have got lots and lots of dependencies, and let's face it, most enterprises, government, finance, big businesses, they have that. They don't have these nice, neat value streams that is the agile dream. They have very complex situations, and unless you standardize, I think it's very, very challenging to get a good view of that portfolio or that program. And so I will always recommend it. And I notice some of the scaled agile plugins now for Jira and for other tooling, and particularly Jira Portfolio, they include a lot of that idea of out-of-the-box standardization. What I think companies sometimes fall into the trap of allowing things to go too far before they bring them back. And actually, I have to say, Agile has not necessarily helped with this, because the idea that you can give full autonomy to a delivery team to work the way it wants and for it to build its requirements in its own way and its own work breakdown in its own way, I think hasn't necessarily helped this particular situation. So yes, I do recommend it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. So just a really quick thank you. Really appreciate you sharing your honest account with us.
Was I too honest?
I certainly learned something, and I hope that others who joined, have also found this useful. So Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and thank you all for listening in. See you again.